Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to today's SecurityBoulevard.com program brought to you by Techstrong, AWS, and Sysdig. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of Techstrong Learning, and we have an exciting panel for you ahead. First, I do have just a couple of housekeeping notes to cover. So today's session is being recorded. If you miss any of our discussion, maybe you have to leave early, or maybe you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend. The on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session. If you have any questions, and we really do hope that you have some, we want you to send those in to us using the Q&A tab, which can be found on the right side of the screen. That is also where you'll find the chat tab, and that's where we want you to get to know your fellow audience members, or maybe just let us know from where you are joining us. We do have a downloadable version of the slides available under the Handouts tab, so feel free to download those if you'd like. And of course, before we close, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around. So the topic of our program today is Finding Suspicious Events with AWS CloudTrail, Fundamentals and Best Practices. And I'm joined by Anna Bellick, Director of Thought Leadership at Sysdig, Brett Wolmerans, Technical Manager at Sysdig, and Ranjit Kalidasan, Senior Solutions Architect at AWS. So Anna, Brett, and Ranjit, thank you all so much for joining me. Anna, I'm going to give you the floor.
Thank you, Cody. We are very pleased to be here, and we hope that we can entertain you for the next hour or so. Like Cody said, my name's Anna. I'm Director of Thought Leadership. So I'm actually going to start us off at a higher level to think about the whole cloud security thing and the implications thereof before we get into the technical details. Now, you all have probably seen this number. 4.24 million is the average cost of a security breach globally, right? This is from the IBM report. And this is a pretty scary number. Actually, there's another scary number that goes with it, where this is the total cost of a breach, including, like how much it costs to fix it and so on. The loss of business is 1.6 million on average. So this is staggering. Like some businesses don't even make that much money. And again, this is an average number. It may or may not be meaningful, but what I actually think is scarier than that is this fact, right? Like that number being whatever it is, most of those breaches in the past have been on-premise. In fact, until very recently, the vast majority of them have been on-premise breaches. So we're talking like huge ransomware breaches that then come with huge ransom. And so those costs kind of make sense. What we see starting in 2020 is that the number of incidents that we see in cloud or impacting cloud assets is actually exceeding the incidents that impact on-prem assets. And so that means that those of us who believed that cloud was a new frontier and that attackers would maybe take their sweet time getting there can no longer defensively believe that, right? Like that means that now those numbers, those 4.24 million numbers, are going to start hitting us in cloud. And so we have to really worry about how to protect ourselves in this new world. So what do you do? Like, is it different? Is it the same? Do your on-prem ideas still work, or do you have to do something new? And I actually believe that you really have to change your perspective, like your mindset about how you think about the cloud versus how you thought about on-premise. Although many of the same principles will apply, like defense in depth and so on, you really have to shift your thinking somewhat fundamentally for one kind of interesting reason. And I'm going to present this model, which Sysdig's, I think, founder came up with the original metaphor, but it's the idea of a castle, right? So we compare our on-premises world to a castle, and castles are great, right? They're great because they have this perimeter analogy, which we also have in a data center. And in a data center, it's a firewall and perhaps your IDS. And then you, in a castle, you have a moat, and maybe you have these huge, huge walls, and maybe your moat's full of alligators. And so it's very, very difficult to get in. Granted, once you get in, you may actually be able to do a lot of damage. But getting in was the bit that was really, really, really hard. And so you felt safe if your castle had a really, really strong perimeter. Now, the cloud is actually not like that. And it's not like that by design. And one way to think about the cloud is more like an amusement park, right? So unlike a castle, an amusement park, well, doesn't have alligators usually, although I guess it depends on the park. But there's no wall to keep people out, right? Like the idea is that it's supposed to be this space where anybody can wander in and out through maybe multiple exits. They're supposed to be pretty free to enjoy the various activities, and it's all meant to be easily accessible, provided you have money to pay for it, right? So the cloud is very much the same. In fact, a lot of the cloud's premise is based on being accessible over the internet through public APIs, and that's awesome. But that is not at all the perimeter, right? Your firewall strategy just falls apart entirely because it's completely antithetical to this design. And so you have to do something differently. You have to reorient your brain to think about the cloud not as a thing you're hiding behind a big wall, but as a thing that you're going to, first of all, monitor. So you're going to look at all of the things that are happening there, and you're going to make sure that you're able to tell when the things that are happening are not okay. And also, you're going to think about your assets a little more granularly, right? So you have to, it's much more important now to understand which assets you have and what their specific risk factors are. Like in the old world, we had kind of crown jewel analysis, and we could identify things as being more precious or more business critical. That becomes even more important in cloud, because now, because everything is accessible in public API, it's just one misconfiguration away from somebody just blowing you away. Whereas in on-premise, you at least had to get through the moat, right? So the hardening of the individual resources and making them difficult to exploit, and then keeping tabs on this API scenario, right? So a lot of this boils down actually to configuration and to making sure that both your preventative and your detective controls are robust enough to stand up to the kinds of use that clouds typically experience from end users. So one piece of this puzzle is CSPM. CSPM stands for Cloud Security Posture Management. And it's kind of like what I just said, right? It deals both with the configuration of the cloud control plane. So this is like, this is everything from which users have access, whether or not they have multi-factor authentication enabled, all this kind of stuff, to as well the configuration of the individual cloud assets. So this may be things having to do with how your IaaS instances are provisioned. It may have to do with your Kubernetes clusters configuration. It may have to do with your network settings. And all these things are configurations that CSPM tends to consider to be in scope for assessment. And in a way, this is actually very similar to a concept that we're all familiar with that used to be called security configuration assessment, that tended to be paired with vulnerability management tools, right? So the difference is in cloud, like I said, we're more API driven. Everything is faster and more short-lived. And it's very easy for one configuration to be incredibly destructive, right? So if you're thinking of the old way of configuration assessment, you would like take potentially hours to scan your environment to see if anything was wrong, right? In cloud, taking hours to scan your environment is actually not acceptable because a lot of assets don't even live for minutes, right? Like if it's up and gone before you even notice, then you're never going to see how it was configured. So one of the things here, of course, is speed, and the other is just the granularity and the scope of the whole thing. So CSPM has many components. We're not going to go through all of them today, but we are going to touch on the bits that involve standard kind of issues, and then the bits where CloudTrail helps us, because that's one of the topics here. Now, I do want to say something about what we actually know about the configurations that people do use in cloud and the mistakes that they make. This data is from something that is called the Sysdig Cloud Native Security and Usage Report. It gets released every year in January, so keep an eye out for the new one soon. But this is real customer data from Sysdig SaaS backend, right? So we see what people are actually doing. And specifically, this data comes from the SAYA's benchmark for AWS foundations, right? And these are clear best practice issues, right? So on the left, you see the users without MFA enabled on the root user account and the teams that use the root user account for admin tasks. Now, this is very much like a thing that we talk about all the time, right? The more people have access to your user account and the less robust your MFA policy is, the more likely you are to end up with credentials that are lost or stolen. And the more dangerous that is for your cloud environment. So you shouldn't do that. But what you see is actually a lot of people do still do this, right? Mostly out of convenience and also out of bad habits that we kind of have learned on premise and taken with us. So obviously, like you should, do the right thing and use dedicated roles and teach your admin teams more explicit cloud security hygiene. But the point is more that a tool that is CSPM capable is going to expose this information to you in a very quick and easy way, right? So if you're like a CISO, or even if you're a manager of some team, it's very easy for you to run a tool to get this data and be like, wow, 48% without MFA, that's bad. I have to do something about it. Whereas if that number, say, were like 5%, you could pat yourself on the back and be happy. The picture on the right is about buckets, our favorite type of misconfiguration because they've already caused tons of problems for people. And buckets are a little more nuanced because realistically speaking, we're saying 73% of accounts have exposed buckets. Okay, well, I mean, it's fine probably for an account to have at least one exposed bucket, right? Lots of buckets are used for serving public information, so it's actually okay. And then 36% of all buckets are open to the public, right? So the point here isn't so much that like you should close all your buckets, but it's more that you need to be aware of which of them are open and you need to be aware as to why, right? So if you can't identify why a bucket is exposed, there's a good chance that could be used against you because you don't know what's in there. So it isn't so much like, oh my God, too many buckets are exposed, but it's more that people tend to not know when those buckets are exposed deliberately or not deliberately. And so it's important to have a policy that's associated with specific environments or specific teams and so on to understand this. So that hopefully gives you an idea for where, oops, I think I lost the slide. But anyway, that hopefully gives you an idea for where you can start in terms of protecting your cloud. And what we're actually going to talk about for the rest of the webinar is how to monitor these environments and how to get the most information through one single source and its cloud logs, right? Every cloud provider offers some kind of logging system. For AWS, it's called CloudTrail. And CloudTrail collects all activity in AWS, every API call, and much, much more. And then it is conveniently and cheaply stored for you in an S3 bucket, which is actually awesome compared to a lot of other alternatives in terms of where you might store this data. This is actually super useful. So it's super useful because you don't have to turn anything on. It's enabled by default. And the thing is, like, even if you don't really know how to get the most value out of these logs, if you're not sure how to query them or if you're not sure what to look for, at least they're always going to be there for you. And once you're able to achieve that capability by hiring, a scale team or outsourcing, they're always going to be there for you to inspect. There are also tools out there that actually build upon what you can do with just CloudTrail or make it easier to audit CloudTrail for kind of more user-friendly views. And so that is one of the things that Sysdig offers. It's a added security intelligence layer on top of CloudTrail through stream detection and an extensive library of threat content. And I am going to now hand you off to our friend and partner, Ranjit at AWS, who will explain to you the AWS side of that magic. And then I'll catch up with you later.
Thank you, Anna. I think this part of the session, I'm going to talk about AWS CloudTrail because, as you know, this is what we are here, knowing about AWS CloudTrail and how Sysdig uses this data and provide a superior CSPM solution, right? So what is AWS CloudTrail? As Anna mentioned, it records all the activity within AWS environment, right? You have seen a security camera analogy that Anna spoke about earlier. So assume that CloudTrail is that virtual security camera, and in real life, what we do with if there's an incident, we go back in the camera recording, play back the recording, and identify the root cause, right? So exactly the capability that CloudTrail is doing. It records all the activity within AWS account, be it an API activity or any additional activities like console activities, CLI calls, programmatic calls. Everything is getting recorded in a CloudTrail, and it is available for the customers. So how CloudTrail can help the security operations, right? First and foremost, just as I mentioned earlier, so you have this recording of all the activities in CloudTrail. It is available by default for up to 90 days, and customers can persist that beyond 90 days by configuring a destination of the CloudTrail like S3 bucket, putting it in S3 bucket, or sending into a CloudWatch logs destination. So it provides a very detailed visibility into all the user services and resource activity, what kind of action happened, what is the authentication result, what is the event result, and everything. So this is the fundamental data that security operation analysts use to troubleshoot any issues or any incidents with AWS, right? So a lot of our services also use CloudTrail as a single source of truth to build the security controls, and customers can also enable automation for any kind of a security incident by leveraging the integration that CloudTrail has with Event Bridge and Lambda, which we're going to talk in the next slides. So how do CloudTrail work for the security operations? As I mentioned, first and foremost, any activity will be available for reference within 15 minutes of the time. That is the broader SLA, but typically it will be available in a few minutes of time. The default CloudTrail data that been created automatically when an account is created is available for 90 calendar days. And as I mentioned, you can create a destination to make this data persist beyond 90 days. CloudTrail has a very important integration with Amazon Event Bridge. For those who don't know what is Amazon Event Bridge is a centralized event bus where all the events from all of our services gets collected into a central place, and then you can trigger an action based on certain event, right? So CloudTrail is a very fundamental event, so you can capture pretty much any kind of a management event or a data event in a CloudTrail as a CloudTrail event source in Event Bridge, and you can enable an action. For example, Anna mentioned about S3 bucket being public, right? If you detect such kind of an event, you can create an event action within a Lambda function so that you can make those S3 or block the public access of an S3 bucket. This is a very simple example, but you can build a very sophisticated automations using Event Bridge and Lambda with CloudTrail data. A lot of our services, as I mentioned earlier, uses CloudTrail as a source of truth that includes Amazon Guard Duty, Amazon Detective, and Amazon Security Hub. Guard Duty is the service that uses CloudTrail data and other data sources like DNS logs to provide a very rich event correlation and findings to our users. And Amazon Detective use the CloudTrail data to and apply a sophisticated ML algorithms to find to get enriched events to the customers. So this chart tells about the how you can make use of the CloudTrail event data within AWS. So in the CloudTrail console, the data is available for 90 days for any event search. You can do it on the AWS console. Beyond that, as I mentioned, you can create a trial to persist this data in a S3 bucket for a long-term research need and analytical needs, or you can send it to the CloudWatch logs, and then you can create a subscription filter to send it to some services like a CSPM services like Sysdig or some solutions that customers can use to analyze this data. This is probably the method they used for some if the customer want to set up a near real-time analysis. So within AWS, we also have ability where the data can be queried using Athena with a glue schema and catalog. It's easy to create, run the offline analytical queries on the CloudTrail data that gets created in or collected in S3 bucket. There's also another feature that customers can use called CloudWatch Insights. CloudWatch Insights is a feature where it can provide any anomaly for the right management events, right? If there's any anomalous activities, for example, if there is suddenly there's a spike of some S3 create bucket events happened, or there's a spike of some any other right management events or the control plane events, you can detect that as a CloudWatch Insights. Even that insight data itself is presented as a CloudTrail data, so that's an additional advantage of using CloudWatch Insights. And also recently, early this year, we also announced a new feature called CloudTrail Lake. This feature helps customers to use SQL-based queries to search the CloudTrail data on the AWS console. So now we've seen what is CloudTrail. Let's look at the anatomy of the CloudTrail event. So this is how the CloudTrail event is structured. It starts with who invoked the particular event, what is the user identity of the event, then what kind of an event, right? It identifies the event source, for example, S3 could be an event source, or EC2 service could be an event source. An event name is the actual API name or actually API call that get invoked. Then the data field is about when that event happened. The event time records all the event in a coordinated universal UTC time format, so that we have a standard across all different AWS regions. And it also identifies in which AWS region the event was invoked. The other data is how the event is invoked, like what kind of say event type, whether it is an API call or it is a console action, so on and so forth, and what is the user identity type. And finally, the result. What is the end result of the event? Is that event is successful, or it return any error code due to probably maybe that event does not possess a right credentials, or right the credentials used for the event do not have any authority, as an example. Finally, let's look at the different type of event types. So CloudTrail record all the management events by default, or we call it control plane events. And apart from that, users can or customers can also create event for data events or data plane events. Currently, we support two types of data plane events: one for S3 objects, another for Lambda events. Some might ask, what is the difference between data events and management events, right? If you take an S3 as an example, Anna mentioned about creating, if you create a S3 bucket with a public access, right? So creating an S3 bucket is a management event. But if you, put an object into the S3 bucket, or delete an object, that becomes the data events. This is a simple example to understand between management and data events. And the last is the inside events. The inside events, as I mentioned earlier, is the unusual anomaly of right management APIs in itself is created as an additional events. It is available in the cloud later. So with that, I'll complete my session. I'll hand it over to Brad to see how these things tie and get into action with the Sysdig CSPM modules.
Thanks, Ranjit. So my name is Brett Wolmarantz. I'm a technical marketing manager at Sysdig. And yeah, this has been a great introduction to how CloudTrail works and the overall concepts. And now we're going to dive a little deeper. So let's get started. I'd like to start off by showing the difference between periodic CSPM scanning of your cloud and the continuous CloudTrail detection that we're talking about today. So getting a baseline, say every 24 hours, is really important. And that'll tell you if you have a risky configuration posture at a given point in time. And often this, as I mentioned a minute ago, runs, say, every 24 hours. And that gives you a baseline. But what we're talking about today is the continuous scanning. So just looking at what is happening there, everything that's being changed, and then most importantly, comparing that to an actual security policy so that you know if something is good, bad, or somewhere in between. So being able to tell the difference between good configuration changes in the cloud and risky changes is really important. So let's look a little bit more at how this happens. Okay, so visually, yes, as mentioned by myself and Anna earlier, the change that happens in the cloud, it can get picked up with a periodic sort of snapshot, or it can get seen by a continuous security camera. And for anyone that missed it earlier in the webinar, yeah, we're talking about the continuous security camera scanning that can see all of these risky events made between periodic scans. And of course, this is made possible with the CloudTrail logs that Ranjit talked about. So whatever is happening in the cloud, again, by default, the actual management events are being logged to CloudTrail. And that I have a couple of sample services in AWS here, but really it's just about all of the services you're likely to use. And that gets consumed by CloudTrail, stored in the S3 bucket. And at that point, you can go and mine that data to figure out what's happening. And again, what you can do with that mining is alerting, threat detection and response, troubleshooting. The magic happens because CloudTrail has all the data. So these activity logs of what is being changed in your cloud can be used for threat detection. And with the threat detection we've got at Sysdig, we have the breadth to detect these across multiple AWS accounts in all your regions, wherever you have CloudTrail enabled. Then we can go pretty deep using our open source Falco language to detect those threats. And I'm going to show you that in just a minute. And then we have a single policy interface that makes it very straightforward to discover what you're looking for in the cloud, much like you would for your Kubernetes and workload runtime, but we're going to focus on the cloud changes here today. So taking a look at 3 examples that would be seen in CloudTrail, and we're seeing it through the lens of Sysdig here today. We've got a user logging in without MFA. We've got some instances being run in a non-approved region, and we have the creation of an internet-facing load balancer. So these are all varying severity type of incidents, and we can sort of see that logging in without MFA is being flagged and categorized as a high severity event. And I think that probably makes sense to all of us. Then we see a couple of low severity events that they don't mean that it's a red light emergency, but you definitely want to be aware of it. And you can also see how these are mapped to various sort of methodologies and frameworks that will help you in your SOC to understand, do you need to take further action? Do you just file this one away for later? So you can see we've got some of these events are referred to in NIST. So that means, well, you're going to have to take a closer look at that in your SOC. So being able to take that CloudTrail data and enrich it with frameworks, with your policies that work for your organization is very important. So let's keep going. And there's plenty of rules in Sysdig that, again, are like a lens put over CloudTrail to allow you to map these to various frameworks, tags. You can create your own tags, in fact, and you can see if these are events to be treated with urgency, if they're medium, low, informational. It just gives you that nice sort of SOC ability and understanding, and lets you know if you need to, get an alert sent to your streaming alert service right away for it, or if it's something that can wait until later. But yeah, we have. I think at the time I made the slide, it's about 190 rules and might be over 200 now. So the Sysdig threat research team is constantly creating new rules, and those get pushed out into Sysdig all the time. And of course, AWS is constantly making new services. So together, there's always a lot happening and a lot to keep track of. So thankfully, we have all of these rules. You don't have to create them. They're all out of the box. So looking at a specific example of making an RDS instance public, which is a valid event that can happen in AWS. So AWS Relational Database Service is a highly successful service from AWS, and it can be made public if you want to share this database service out on the internet, which again is a valid use case. But you probably want to be alerted when that happens. You don't want that just to be a blind spot for you. So because when that happens, attackers can scan your IP space. They can look for common database ports, 3389 and so forth, and be able to start just trying to get into your data. Now, of course, it's a whole nother conversation of other ways to protect that. But the point is, if someone in your organization makes an RDS instance public, you want to be alerted to that. So let's take a look at exactly how that happens in Sysdig. So here is I've mapped a couple of the portions of the CloudTrail event over to the Falco rule. And the event that happens in AWS is the modified DB instance. And the key piece of information here is that publicly accessible is true. And so that is pretty easy to see how that maps to the Falco rule in Sysdig. And again, this is just informational for us on the webinar. This comes out of the box. So you don't have to write these, but you can see that it's fairly straightforward to understand what's happening in an event and how it applies to a Falco rule. If you do wish to write a custom rule, you can copy said rule we looked at and modify a few fields and write your own custom rules and save them in Sysdig. Now, I'm not going to get deep into the weeds on that here today, but it's nice to know we can do that if you need to. This is an example of sharing a snapshot with a different AWS account, or what I might call a foreign AWS account. So with a few clicks and easy mods, you can create a rule that actually does this for you. And in testing, here is a screenshot I made of CloudTrail. Here we are seeing that a snapshot is shared with a AWS account that's not ours. It's one that starts with 05, but we can't see the rest of it. And we're going to see if Sysdig can actually detect this. And yes, so there it is. So Sysdig picks up on that and has categorized it as a high severity alert. So just a quick example of the mapping of the open source Falco language to CloudTrail threat detection in AWS. So wanted to give you a few slides on that, because what I'm going to do now is flip over to a very short demonstration just for a couple of minutes to show you how this looks. So let's go ahead and share a couple of my my slides here. Let's start off here. Okay, great. So you should be seeing my CloudTrail console here. So we've got lots of events, and in this case, we're talking about AWS RDS. So what I'm going to do is look for an event name, and I know this one off the top of my head. It's modified DB instance, and I'm not going to drill down too much into this because I don't want to show any detailed data about this particular event. But these are the events that all happen, and it's there's lots of them. And let's see how these look in Sysdig. So I'm going to share that tab like this. Okay, so now we are seeing the Sysdig Insights view, and this is showing me my whole AWS account. And what we're seeing here are all kinds of events. So you can see I have informational, low, medium, and high events turned on. And if I want to just zoom in and see, say, just my high events, I can just type high in here, and I can see, aha. So this is exactly what we've been talking about. So there were a total of 2 events of sharing a database out publicly. And if I click on this little arrow, I can actually go to the discrete events and see the exact time this happened. And if I click on each of these, I can get into that who, what, when, where, how data that CloudTrail has, and see what exactly happened here. So we can see who did this, where it was, when it happened, and which particular frameworks and security standards that this is going to violate. So this will help me in taking my next steps to deal with this and hopefully lock this one down. So either this doesn't happen again, or we really understand why this happened. And it's easy to filter on everything related to RDS. If I just type RDS in here in a free-form text search, now we can see a whole variety. Some of these are low or high. Here's the modification of that snapshot, and that is one we looked at earlier. And yeah, so just a quick look overall. Let's go back to that zoomed out view because we've got so much good stuff there. We're seeing everything that happens in the cloud. And again, this is all happening in real time. As I make a change, as CloudTrail logs that change, Sysdig is going to pick that up and bring that and surface that up to you and help you categorize that and help you respond, help you take that next action. So hopefully that's a good, quick 60-second look at how we are viewing the cloud. I want to show just a little bit more here on the actual policies we have. So each of these events gets evaluated against a policy. because CloudTrail has all that data, but CloudTrail is not opinionated as to if something is a threat or not. So these curated policies include, for example, events that you care about. So scheduling a key deletion is something you're going to care about. Console root login without MFA is something you care about. So just a couple examples of events that happen that are considered high severity by default. And then what you can also do is go ahead and modify these. If I look at this policy, I've included a couple of RDS related rules, and I've saved this as medium, and I can actually set up a notification channel to get notified and get alerted in a way that makes sense for me. Looking at our actual rules, let's look at all of our CloudTrail rules. So you can see all of these rules are included out of the box. And let's look at one that's slightly different. This is the creating of a network ACL. So this rule detects when a new NACL gets created. And again, that by itself, it's just a rule. This isn't a high, medium, or low severity event. You put that into a policy, and then you'll be able to understand the context of where that fits in to your overall scope. So with that, we've taken a look at the Sysdig view of the cloud, seeing how it surfaces all the events, seeing how if you visually mouse over these, you can drill down into exactly where that happened. I can see this is in US East. So yeah, hopefully that is a helpful little overview. And with that, I'm going to stop the live demo, and we can move on to the next part of our presentation here. And that's going to be with Anna taking us home with some conclusions.
Nice. I was going to say, I believe that is my cue. I'm going to close it out for you today with just a couple of thoughts for what this even means for you, right? So that was a super great technical interview. Thank you, gentlemen. I hope everybody learned a lot. But what's my plan, right? If I'm a technical leader or even a technical practitioner or a business leader, what should I think about? So we have some recommendations on this slide, and I'll go through them and then I'll wrap up. First of all, enable CloudTrail. This is a no-brainer. Like we said, it's enabled by default, but you should actually check if it's been disabled, because obviously it can be. When we look at our backend, 99% of our customers have it enabled, but that means 1% don't. It may be intentional, it may be not. You have to be a little careful. Even if you can't make use of all this data that you have access to right away, because maybe your team is not quite mature enough, or you simply have other priorities, that's okay. You want to make sure that the log detection is available to you and the logs are there in case, for example, there's an incident that you want to investigate where you need them, or simply so that you can make use of them at any point in time. Also, this is a CIS benchmark requirement, which some people have to worry about for compliance reasons. Secondly, manage configuration risk with CSPM. So that's a broad statement, of course. And again, I'm going to say start small, because there is so much there to do and check and know and worry about. Sometimes it's a huge amount of new information if you're really not used to the way the cloud works. But many times the first use cases are compliance driven, like maybe you're just looking at your PCI environment, or you're just looking at some other highly important environment. But configuration hardening and monitoring is key to any environment, right? So eventually you're going to want your entire estate to have solid configuration policy that you comply with, and a tool that's able to expose all of the information you need and allow you to remediate your problems very quickly. So this is definitely something that can be overwhelming, but we highly recommend that you start looking at this right away. And then ensure that your sensitive workloads and assets are protected in real time. As I mentioned and Brett mentioned, static scans do give you great visibility right away, and sometimes they're very, very easy to start using. And that's fantastic. I definitely am not going to discourage you from looking at that data. But if you have highly important environments or applications that you really need to watch more frequently than just like once a day or once an hour, you're going to want real-time data. So make sure that your configurations are monitored in real time, so that you can't end up in a situation where maybe like a configuration was okay, at 2 o'clock, and it was okay again at 3 o'clock, but that's only because somebody changed it and then changed it back in that interval, right? Like that can end quite badly. Treat the cloud threats a little differently, right? So we've been talking kind of theoretically about cloud threats for a while because everyone's been anticipating this like onslaught of horrible new attacks that are cloud native. It hasn't entirely manifested this way, right? Like so far, most of the cloud breaches have been either things that were pretty predictable, like somebody failed to configure something correctly and then somebody just walked in and did whatever they wanted. But that ecosystem is evolving very rapidly, and the attacker's kind of perspective of it and their techniques are also evolving rapidly. So you kind of have to really watch this space to make sure that you are in fact protecting yourself from all the things that are happening. There are ways to do that. Obviously, you can read stuff online. There are folks that help you along the way. So Sysdig has this fantastic threat research team that is always shipping content. And I mean both content in the tool that helps you detect scary things and content in blogs that helps you understand why those things are scary. We also ship sometimes more substantial assets. I highly recommend checking out Sysdig's Anatomy of a Cloud Attack paper, which talks about how a cloud attack is different from an on-premise attack for the same kind. Like if you wanted to ransomware somebody, how would you do that on-premise versus in cloud? A very cool mindset, I would say, to look into. And then ultimately, I just want to conclude with the fact that the best mindset kind of perspective that I've encountered so far about how to deal with cloud security is to think about why you have the security controls you have today in the first place, right? Like, so your on-premise security strategy came out of some set of requirements. Like you decided to use those tools and build those controls and have those policies for some business reason, or maybe compliance reason, but whatever. And so instead of copying the solution, actually go back and figure out what the problem you solved was, and then reconsider what that problem looks like in cloud, right? So if you're doing something for a compliance reason, it's more straightforward. But if you're protecting an environment, that's a PCI environment, don't just say like, hey, here's all my PCI controls, I'm just going to lift and shift them to cloud. Go back and think about like why those controls exist and what they're supposed to do. And then think about what is the most correct and most appropriate cloud native way to actually enable the controls that achieve the same thing. So that forces you to think in a cloudy mindset instead of an on-prem mindset that then you shift, and you end up with a better result in the end. I'm not going to pretend it's easy. It's not. It's actually quite hard, and it's going to take us all a long time to get to a good place in terms of cloud security posture. But give yourself permission to take the time to actually do it right and to train up your team so that they are able to deal with this new. They have a great opportunity to gain a new skill set and become amazing at these things. You just have to make sure that they have the resources they need to execute on all of this beautifully. We thank you very much for joining us today and taking the time to listen. We hope you got some value out of this presentation. Please check out the resources that are available in the slides. The slides will be available for you to download. And we hope to see you again in the future, and we'll take any questions that you have.
Right. So yes, there are a lot of chat questions in there, and some of us have been trying to answer them as fast as we can. So what I'm going to do is try to scroll up and have a look here. But of course, as I do that, more questions are flowing in. So we'll just try for the next few minutes to answer your questions, and round robin between Ranjit, Anna, and myself. Yeah, hopefully this was enough to at least pique your interest to take it to the next level and try this out for yourself. It's pretty straightforward to do. So just a trial on Sysdig.com is all you need to get started. It's just a quick a Terraform copy and paste, or CFT copy and paste, and you'll be off and running with detecting risky events that are happening in those CloudTrail trails. But let's take a look and see what we've got here. Are CloudWatch logs immutable? Can they be secured with similar ACLs? I see Ranjit has answered that one. CloudWatch logs are immutable within the CloudWatch service, and there's the capability to use IAM policies to secure those CloudWatch logs. So that's a good one. I also see earlier the question was asked about risky changes, how are those defined? Yes,
I was going to say,
use the
don't
program.
read the
How do
whole
you-
thing I
how do
wrote
you make
because
that?
I wrote many things. Yeah, let's maybe just kind of do a quick summary. I can basically give my own answer, and then let's have Renji answer the other one for himself because it'll just be faster. Risky changes are tough to define because, again, if you're an end user, you know your environment best, so you're going to have the best time identifying the things that are risky in your perspective. But there are many things that are known to be risky, right? So Brett mentioned a few in his presentation. They're also just standard risky configurations, and many tools, including Sysdig, and including, I believe, it was native tools, will actually inform you of the fact that something weird's gone on. It's never a complete set that you get out of the box, so you do need to make sure you extend that to things that you know are important to you that may not have been included. But in general, the starting point that you get out of the box is usually pretty good, at least for compliance reasons.
I think added to what Anna said, that I think there are certain risky changes that we kind of we been recommending customers to avoid, like making your S3 bucket public is one of them. Failure to put a MFA into IAM users, or especially the root user, is another risky change. And another one I could think is having a security group rules to allow for a default any public IP address is another risky change. So so it goes on. So it all depends on what's the particular customer use case. But there are certain things like the examples that I mentioned are considered as very risky changes from my AWS perspective.
Cool. I'll grab another one that was sitting toward me more or less, but maybe Renji can add something as well. Is there a distinction that you can make between the intentionally exposed buckets and the unintentionally exposed buckets? And the answer is typically no. So it's very hard for a third party, whether that's a cloud provider or another tool, to know what you meant to do. So we have no idea if you expose that data on purpose or not. However, there are sometimes tools that are able to identify data that is more than likely sensitive. I actually believe it was Macy does this to some extent. So if you're storing things like social security numbers or credit card numbers or data that we know is sensitive, there may be tools that can see that in your bucket and be like, yo, really don't want to expose that. Please don't. But not every tool can do this. And so you have to be a little careful about that. You may still miss things. It really helps if you actually just know what you put in your buckets, and then you make your decision on their exposure based on what is in there from your perspective, not from hoping that a data classification tool will figure it out.
And Anna's right, Macy is the tool that we recommend. Macy can analyze the content of an S3 bucket. It can apply based on the patterns that you can define. So, so based on also the compliance requirements, like for example, PCI DSS compliant, those data can be detected by Macy's, and the whole automation actually can also be. You can define it within AWS using the Event Bridge Lambda examples that I was talking about earlier.
Cool. Then there's a question that is probably for Brett. With respect to low, medium, and high severity of events, are those user defined or some other way?
Right. Yeah, I actually was just busy typing an answer to the question of how difficult it is to integrate. And I believe you can see that in the Q&A published answers. Should show up there. But the live answer to that is to get started. Yeah, I'll actually try to show you that here. That would be good. Let me just show you how you do that here. If you want to get started. All right, perfect. So assuming you can see my screen at the moment, so the way you get started is you will just put in your AWS account ID. And once I have enough digits, that'll be valid. And then you can just launch a stack over here, and that'll pop up your CloudFormation tab in your AWS console that if you're familiar with, great. If you're not familiar with, it's very easy to use. And CFTs are a good thing, and we love those in AWS and use them all the time, and those work great. On the other hand, if you prefer Terraform, that's simply you click the copy here, you'd put in your account here, you do a copy, and then you'd run your Terraform init and Terraform apply, and you can do that right in your AWS CloudTrail, for example, in your management console. So that's how you get started. The short answer is CFTs or Terraform, but it takes it's literally just seconds, assuming you've got some passing familiarity with either of those. So I hope that helps.
I see one that just came in about the alphabet soup. I'll type an answer out, but I'll answer it anyway. Can you summarize the various terms coined out there, including CSPM, CWPP, etc.? Actually, this is like one of my worst nightmares. I used to be an analyst at Gartner, and we invent these terms at Gartner, so it's like love-hate from me. I hate it when you invent terms that aren't actually helping, and I feel like half of these are in that category. But I'll do what I can. So CSPM, like I said, Cloud Security Posture Management. I mentioned it's basically what used to be known as Security Configuration Assessment in the old world. It's not different in principle. It's the same thing. It's just that the mechanism by which it works and the types of things you're looking at are different because you're now in a cloud and not on premise. CWPP stands for Cloud Workload Protection Platform. That is something that is trying to be kind of like EDR, but again, cloud native and probably a little bit more limited in scope. There are lots of vendors that call themselves CWPP, and they don't all do the same thing, so it's very hard to tell the difference. But typically, it is looking at the workload rather than the cloud control plane or the cloud configuration. So CSPM kind of spans things that the cloud provider owns and the things that you own, although it's reporting to you on things you're supposed to configure in that cloud. CWPP are things that cloud provider has like typically nothing to do with at all. It's like whatever you deployed, you need to make sure that you manage that workload's protection. There's then a third term that is CNAPP that you may have heard, which is often referred to as a combination of these two things. It stands for Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. My opinion on that, again, is that that native is doing a lot of work there. So CNAPP tends to include a lot of tools that deal with custom-built software. So it may include aspects of application security, aspects of open source, dependency scanning, and like those kinds of things. It may or may not include threat detection, right? So threat detection is actually this kind of other thing that is included sometimes in CWP, sometimes not, sometimes in CNAPP, sometimes not. Some people refer to it as CDR, Cloud Detection and Response. So I think that's most of them. I'm not going to do CASB because I don't want to. Cloud Access Security Broker, it's like a proxy kind of thing. And I'm not going to do SASE. Don't even get me started.
I think there is another question someone's asking. What's the difference between a CloudTrail Insights and GuardDuty findings, right? So CloudTrail Insights, as I mentioned earlier in my session, it's very specific about right management events, right? Any anomalies with the right management API events. Whereas GuardDuty uses CloudTrail as one of the source data along with other data, internal data, DNS logs to provide very enriched findings. It can help customers detect if there's any instance being compromised, if there are any anomalous activities happening in an S3 bucket, if there is a malicious roles or users been acting on in an AWS environment, right? Very much beyond that what CloudTrail Insights could offer, right? CloudTrail Insights, as I mentioned, using right management events, right? Whereas GuardDuty findings from S3 context, it uses S3 data events to identify if there's an anomalous activity happening on an S3 bucket.
I think we did a pretty good job fielding most of these. So it's probably a good place for us to end. So I think we will hand it back off to Cody, perhaps, to close.
Anna, thank you so much. And Ranjit, Brett, thank you both so much as well for all taking the time and joining us today and really running through all of this and showing your demos. I know a lot of work goes into these presentations, so thank you so much. I would love to remind our audience that today's session was recorded. So following this, you should receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand, or you can find the recording living on the securityboulevard.com, Security Boulevard website at securityboulevard.com/webinars. So we do still have those 4 $25 Amazon gift cards to give out. Our first winner is Maxim V. Our second winner is Katie P. Our third winner is Brad H. And our fourth and final winner is Cliff Z. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Please keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card. But if you don't see an email, keep an eye on your spam folder. I would like to thank Sysdig and AWS for sponsoring today's program. And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you spending time with us. We do just ask for 1 more minute of your time to fill out a brief survey that will pop up on your screen as soon as we close out. But otherwise, we hope to see everyone at an upcoming Techstrong Learning program. Everyone have a great rest of your day. And Anna, Ranjit, Brett, thank you again once more.
Thank you.